International aid agency Oxfam says that indigenous farmers are paying too high a price for the world's growing appetite for sugar. Let's have a look at these figures here that Oxfam puts on the table. It points at three particular major international food companies, blaming them. It says that they buy sugar from suppliers who've unfairly taken land from local farmers, especially in countries like Cambodia and Brazil. Oxfam, as such, is urging Coca-Cola, PepsiCo and Associated British Foods to prevent their suppliers from engaging in so-called land grabs. And in a new report called Sugar Rush, Oxfam says the amount of land being used to produce sugar globally is around about 31 million hectares. Just to give you an idea of size, that's around about the same surface area as the country of Italy. Oxfam also says that families who once made a decent living from the land these days are just struggling to survive without their farming income. Many, according to the report, are so impoverished that they can no longer send their children to school. Well, all of this is happening as the global sugar trade reaches some $47 billion. Sugar production is expected to increase by another 25% in just the next 7 years to come. Erinch Sahan joins us now live from London. He's the private policy advisor for Oxfam and somebody who is behind this report and intimately familiar with it. First of all, I suppose the obvious thing is that land is becoming scarce. There's more people on the planet who need to be fed and housed. So wouldn't there naturally be a confrontation between supply and demand anyway?
Well, what we're saying is that smallholder farmers, communities are able to grow a lot of these commodities, a lot of these agricultural products. So there's absolutely no reason why they need to be pushed off their land. And besides the business reasons for doing this, it's just plain wrong. People need to be given a chance to be consulted. People need to be given their lands.
You highlight Cambodia and Brazil in particular, but also other countries around the world. Yes. How bad is the problem? Do you have any examples?
We do, and as you say, we've highlighted Cambodia and Brazil. 2 years ago, we came out with a report that highlighted 5 other countries where this is happening. We know this is rampant. We know that a lot of these issues aren't being dealt with, and companies aren't being open about where the risks are, where the opportunities are to actually address them.
Yeah, let's get to these companies, because what's really interesting about your report is you're not specifically pointing the finger directly at the big companies themselves, but rather at turning a blind eye to bad practices by their suppliers. It's a bit like what we've seen in Bangladesh with the garment trade, etc. Do we need some kind of action like the one that the textiles retailers have done in Bangladesh?
We do. We need companies to commit to making sure that people aren't being pushed off their land. We also need to see them.
How can they realistically police that, though?
Well, they can put systems in place. They can conduct impact assessments to demonstrate they understand where that's happening. They can be open about who they're sourcing from, where they're sourcing from. They can be open about where they see the risks, and they can be open about how they're making their suppliers do the right thing. What are they putting in their supplier codes? What are they putting in terms of the business expectations of their suppliers? And we're not seeing any evidence that they're really taking the land grabs issue seriously.
Right. Well, we do have some evidence that they're responding to questions on this issue. Let's bring you some of these quotes here coming from PepsiCo. Again, in response to your Oxfam report, PepsiCo has been saying, we have reached out to our suppliers. They have assured us that they are in compliance with applicable laws. Excuse me. We should continue to engage with our partners to further understand how they're addressing the issues raised by Oxfam. Coca-Cola, on this hand, saying, we're asking our suppliers to recognise and safeguard the rights of communities and traditional peoples to maintain access to land and natural resources. Is it up to these companies, or is it up to governments?
The companies need to do a lot more. These are the 3 most powerful companies in the sugar game. So they have a huge amount of leverage. They can really lead the way here to make sure that land rights are protected for communities around the world. So while obviously governments do have a part to play, they can't defer to governments and say, we'll do as much as the law lets us get away with.
Yeah, let me also bring our viewers the Associated British Foods one as well. The true test of any organisation is actually what it does. Ilova, which is a subsidiary of theirs that you've highlighted here, is a magnificent example of a company that works to the highest ethical standards to benefit communities in which it operates. Will there ever be a time, if sugar trade is rising around about 25% over the next 7 years, that the local people can actually get on the back of that trade and benefit from it? So can't these local farmers produce sugar themselves?
Yes, they can.
So how could we do that?
Well, Ilova is actually a company that does that in lots of places throughout Africa. What we're saying is, in combination with that, we need to make sure that you have systems in place and you're disclosing how you're dealing with this this raging issue of people losing their land around the world. And that's a real issue for us, to see that they're disclosing this. They're ensuring, we need to see that they're ensuring consumers that what they're putting in their mouth hasn't meant that people have been pushed off their land.
All of this leaves a rather decidedly bitter taste, doesn't it, if you are buying sugary drinks, foods, comfort foods, a little treat, and actually other people are losing their lands on the back of this. And if we talk about what realistically can be achieved here, these kind of comments that have come from PepsiCo, Coca-Cola and Associated British Foods, what do you make of them? Is it the usual standard guff?
I think it's a tough issue for them, and I think it's a new issue for them to deal with. I think this is something that's been quite convenient, really, to ignore and not to tackle, because it's not an easy thing to solve. But I'm encouraged to see that they're responding. I'm encouraged to see that some of their language seems to suggest that they're going to start looking at this issue. But what we need to see is action a lot sooner than what some of these comments are indicating.
Erinch Sahan, thank you so much for joining us from Oxfam with that latest report that says that people are being pushed off their land because of land grabs by companies working to provide sugar for some of the world's biggest drinks and food makers. Thank you so much for joining us here on World Business Today.